We are the Childhood Collective, and we have helped thousands of overwhelmed parents find joy and confidence in raising their child with ADHD. I'm Katie, a speech language pathologist.
And I'm Lori.
And I'm Mallory, and we're both child psychologists. We combine the science of ADHD with the compassion of moms and bring you practical tools you can start using today.
So hit subscribe and let's help your family shine with ADHD. Today, we are delighted to have Jan Stewart joining us to share about her experience raising two neurodivergent children. Jan is a mother, mental health, and neurodiversity governance expert and advocate, and she has most recently added author to her list of achievements. Thanks for joining us today, Jan.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Lori and Marilee.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today. And so today we have asked Jan to share 4 key insights from her experience raising two neurodivergent children who are now adults. But before we jump into that, I know we gave you a little bit of an introduction there, Jan, but we would love to hear from you a little bit more about who you are, a little bit about your journey, and what has culminated in you publishing your new book, Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness.
Well, absolutely delighted to do that. And hello, everyone from Toronto. So, like many of you, my husband David and I were raised in warm, loving families, and neither of us had known true adversity in our lives before we got married and had kids. We both have our MBAs. We both had very senior careers in business. And then finding out that we didn't have one, but we had 2 children with a multiple complex mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders really came as a shock to us and turned our lives upside down. Words like ADHD and executive function, along with autism, Tourette syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, learning disabilities. We had never heard these words in our vocabularies before, and it's been quite a harrowing journey at times. We've experienced unfettered impulsivity and distractibility, frightening screaming rages from emotional overload, nonstop bizarre compulsive rituals, vocal and motor tics, paralyzing anxiety, severe learning disabilities, and the list goes on. But we've also experienced great joy and lots of fun. And it's a journey that continues today. We've had to work hard to navigate our complex healthcare system to find the right psychiatrists and psychologists. We've had to navigate hard to find schools who would really partner with us. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to come back to that as one of the key insights later. Yep. Mm-hmm. And we've had to work hard when the children transitioned into adulthood to find employers who were inclusive, understanding, and accommodating. Mm-hmm. We face new challenges at every stage, from complications from co-occurring diagnoses called comorbidities, to teachers who thought, for example, Ainsley was just lazy. I'm sure that sounds familiar to many of you.
Yes.
Yep.
Right? We've had to accept and really embrace the fact that our lives were not going to be and are not going to be as planned for or hoped for in many ways, so that we can move forward happily. Mm-hmm. And we've had to learn to recalibrate relationships with certain family members and friends in the face, as you all know, of misunderstandings, fear, and stigma.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But the good news is, I think this journey and the children's stories really propelled all of us into advocacy and governance years ago. I've sat on about 7 different boards and advisory councils in both Canada and the United States. I was vice chair of Canada's largest psychiatric hospital, CAMH. I was on the Parent Advisory Council at Massachusetts General Hospital's Department of Neuropsychopharmacology. Try saying that word. I currently chair the largest autism services organization in Canada, a wonderful organization called Carrie's Place Autism Services. And I'm also a consultant to the Tourette Association of America Education Advisory Board in the US. Now, all these activities have caused a lot of parents to reach out over the years for help. Mm-hmm. And I so remember being in their shoes and in being in many of your shoes, frightened,
Mhm. Mhm.
frozen, feeling isolated, not knowing where to turn or how. And looking back, I know how much I would have benefited from knowing what worked for others.
Mhm.
And that's why I wrote Hold On Tight. I really want readers to understand the unsugar-coated reality and toll that ADHD and other disorders bring to families.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
equally, I celebrate successes and I share and gift readers, and you've alluded to this, with key insights to help optimize their lives. And by the way, although I myself come from a position of privilege as a white heterosexual woman with an MBA, these insights are universal. Whether you're struggling financially or not, whether you're single or married, they cross all boundaries of race, religion, cultures, ethnicities, sexual orientation, gender, the list goes on.
Mhm.
Yep.
What it takes, and everyone can do this, is grit, perseverance, determination, and a will to succeed.
I love that,
Oh,
and I think you're
yep.
speaking to our listeners here, and one of the most common pieces of feedback we get from our listeners is, I'm so glad to hear that I am not alone, that I'm not
Yep.
the only one who feels this way. And I think it's great for parents to hear from you, having like been there, and I don't want to say made it out the other side, because I know that even though your kids are adults, you're still mom and you're still caring for them and you're still doing a lot of these things that you've done their whole life. But it's great for parents to hear from you, kind of
Yep.
having been through this, having fought the good fight for years now, right? So we're so excited that you're here to kind of share some of these key insights that any of our parents can implement to really advocate for their child and help them find the most successful
Yep.
future.
Yeah, so let's jump into some of those insights. So, one of the insights we know that you offer to parents, which I absolutely love, is to trust their gut. So,
Mhm.
can you share a little bit about how you've had to trust your gut as a mom and what you tell other parents in a similar situation today?
Yeah, this is a real common theme. And
Yes.
trust your gut applies time and again in your child's life.
Yes.
You know your child best. If you think something is seriously wrong, it generally is. I am sympathetic with doctors who see a number of parents who needlessly and excessively worry. I understand that. And you do have to listen to your doctor and parenting experts. But for example, I look back at Andrew as a baby. His hands and feet move constantly in circular motion.
Hmm.
Unlike other babies, he didn't talk to himself or gurgle or play in his crib. And he had no self control when it came to feeding. David and I remember when he was 6 months old, we did an experiment and decided to feed him as many bottles of milk as he wanted to see what he would consume.
Mm.
And after he downed 5 straight bottles, five, without stopping, and would have kept going, and by the way, didn't get sick, we
Wow.
were scared and stopped him.
Hmm.
And the next day, we decided to control his intake and gave him just one bottle. And to our surprise, he was just as happy. So we saw that even at that age as a baby, there were
Hmm.
problems with self regulation.
Mm.
Now, in hindsight, we know these are a number of neurodevelopmental markers. But of course, we
Hmm.
were first time parents. We didn't know.
Hmm.
And every time I called the pediatrician with a concern, I'm sure you've heard this before,
Yes.
he turned to me and said, Jen, calm down. Your children are just fine. You need to stop being an overly vigilant triple type A mother. In effect,
we
I was the problem, right? Been there?
yes,
Yep.
we hear that. I hear that the time, all the
Yeah,
time.
that's right.
Yep.
Yep.
But I should have trusted my gut.
Yep.
And we all should. You have to listen to what they have to say, but if it doesn't resonate, keep looking. Get a second
Hmm.
opinion, a
Hmm.
third if needed. You deserve it.
Hmm. Yep. I love that. And I think that's something that our listeners hear a lot is, let's wait and see,
Yeah.
or boys will be boys, or that's typical toddler behavior. But as parents reflecting back, they'll say, I knew from 6 months old, or, even
Yep.
just a couple weeks old, that something was different about my child, but I kept kind of being brushed off. They kept telling me I was worrying too much. They kept saying, let's wait and see. And so I love, this is so important. And we tell parents this all the time, to trust their gut, follow that instinct. So another insight that you share is to talk openly with your child about their strengths and their struggles. So, can you share a little bit more about why you think this particular insight is important, and maybe how you've gone about doing this with your own kids over the years?
Yes, it always sounds like a cliche. Every parent has always read and heard, talk openly. But what does that really mean? Look, children with ADHD and the additional disorders are naturally frightened when they don't know what's going on in their lives. Why is there out of control behavior? Why are they causing pain and havoc at home and at school? There's shame and anguish at times.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they don't explicitly ask, they want help.
Yeah.
So sit down with them. Listen carefully without criticism or judgment, which, by the way, is not one of my strengths.
Yep.
let, let them know they're understood and valued. David and I had real problems overcoming this initially. When Andrew was experiencing frightening 2-hour daily screaming rages from emotional overload and terrible nonstop compulsive rituals, he told us he was going crazy and wanted to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I just froze.
Yeah.
And Ainsley, I came home from work one day to find her curled up in a corner, sobbing and saying, "Why don't I have any friends?"
Mm-hmm.
And the next week, after she had been sent to the principal for her disruptive, out of control behavior for the umpteenth time, she wrote me a note. And the note said, "Mom, I know I'm a bad child, but I can't help my out of control behavior with everything going on at home." And that was my reaction, Mallory. I just went, "Hmm." But David and I picked ourselves up quickly. We sat down with the kids. We explained and made sure they understood they weren't bad children, that what was happening wasn't their faults.
Mm-hmm.
We separated them from their
Mm-hmm.
ADHD and other disorders so that their identities weren't tied 100% to their
Mm-hmm.
issues.
Mm-hmm.
And importantly, we didn't hide or avoid information. This is one of my big bugaboos with parents. I understand parents are concerned that their child, for example, might not want to take medications and be seen as different. So they call them special vitamins. I'm sure you've heard that
Mm-hmm.
before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's helpful. What you want to do is educate your child
Mm-hmm.
so that as they grow older, they can become increasingly empowered and become involved in their own treatment and self advocacy. That's what
Mm-hmm.
all parents want.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And importantly, don't forget siblings.
Mm.
It's so easy to unintentionally relegate siblings who have less issues. Ainsley has less than Andrew to the background while you're consumed with the child in
Mm.
crisis. And I
Mm.
know I've done it. Coming home one afternoon and finding Ainsley hiding and shivering in fear in her closet during one of her brother's frightening rages
Mm.
really shook me but woke me up. And David and I started spending whatever precious little time we had. And as everyone knows, it's very little time, but one on one activities that she enjoyed. And
Mm.
it's got to be an activity that the child enjoys. So in
Yep.
her case, she was a real tomboy. It was hockey, it was soccer, but she also liked baking together and doing
Mm-hmm.
certain board games like checkers and Candyland. We
Mm-hmm.
had an urban farm program in Toronto that was wonderful for siblings in trauma, and that separated her from the challenges at home, gave her
Mm-hmm.
really needed respite, and also
Mm-hmm.
started her on a lifelong love of animals. Sibling support groups, extremely important and helpful.
Mm.
And probably the most important thing we did was, again, sit down with her and really explain in age appropriate language, of course, what was going on with Andrew. So we demystified it and it became
Mm-hmm.
less frightening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. And I work with so many kids that have really been through traumatic experiences at home, seeing siblings really lose control
Yes.
and not knowing what that was. And I love that you talk about bringing the siblings into that. I just spoke with a family yesterday that their child just got a diagnosis of autism, and he has cognitively would have a hard time understanding that, but he can understand some of it. Like that can be explained, and the parents are really hesitant to talk with him about it. And we kind of processed that together, because I think there was the main reason for that was how they viewed autism as like a bad thing. And as we talked about that, I think, part of it is, once you understand what autism is, it's not this bad thing. It's going to help your child understand themselves better,
Mhm. Mhm.
and help siblings understand that child better, so that, again, they can shift their expectations and understand what's going on in the home too. I love
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
if I may, I would tell you that in Canada, and I would bet in the US, we have a movement now in autism that is no longer using the terminology autism spectrum disorder. It's just using autism to reflect the fact that we want to use strength-based language, and that
Mhm.
differences in brain functioning are just that. They're differences,
Mhm.
not
Mm-hmm.
deficits.
Mhm.
So,
And
Yep.
I think it's
Yep.
so important, coming back to your point of, your children were coming home, they were feeling like bad kids. Society is going to label our kids
right.
if we don't give them better understanding of how their brain works and why it works that way. So our kids want to do well. They're desperate to do well. They don't want to get sent to the principal's office every day. They don't want to get
Yeah,
calls home every day. They don't want to lose their cool at home every day for hours on end. They want to do well. But when we don't explain to them why that's harder for them than their peers, they're going to start to internalize those struggles and feel like they are a bad kid.
absolutely.
So it's so important to be open with them and share with them why the things they do well, why they do those things well, but why they struggle with the things they struggle with. And it's not
Right.
because they're bad.
Right.
So, as another insight, Jan, you encourage parents to embrace research, medications, therapy. Can you share a little bit more about what this looked like in your home raising your own kids?
Yes, I absolutely, and these are very important. The first thing that I did was really embrace the power of research, not only to find resources, but it really has helped me become a better advocate, a more effective advocate. I read everything that I could, the classic book by Edward Hallowell, Driven to Distraction, about ADHD, The Boy Who Couldn't Stop Washing, about OCD, autism videos, it goes on.
Yeah.
At the same time, we have a world class children's hospital in Toronto called Sick Kids Hospital, and they were great the first year. But even they said, you'd be better served going to the US because much larger population, they see many more children with similar profiles. So this is relevant not only to me in Canada, but to you listeners who are not in major metropolitan centers in the US.
Yes.
Mm,
So again, I embraced research. I made 10, 20 calls to hospitals and psychiatrists. I stayed east of the Mississippi because we're in Toronto and I wanted to stay close. And I
mhm,
kept hearing the name Massachusetts General Hospital and
mm.
found a wonderful psychiatrist in the Department of Neuropsychopharmacology again, who, in Andrew's words, saved his life.
Oh,
And that's when, when Andrew was 9 and Ainsley was 7 and almost 8, that's when they were fully diagnosed for the first time,
Mm,
correctly and fully diagnosed.
mm,
Now, also, research related to support groups.
mm,
David and I did a lot of looking into what we should do. And the first support group we went to was for parents of kids with ADHD. And it was
mhm,
great to meet parents who had kids like ours who were hyperactive, impulsive, distracted. But no other parent had a child who was raging.
mm,
mhm.
And it just happened to be 2 months later when David was researching Tourette syndrome that
mm,
he saw the words rage and emotional overload tied to commonly with Tourette.
mm,
And I
mhm,
can't tell you how quickly we ran to our nearest Tourette support group.
mm,
Very
Mhm.
reaffirming.
mhm,
Yeah.
But of course, with research, it can be never ending, and the law of
mhm,
diminishing returns does kick in. So take
mhm,
a breather from time to time. You never
mhm,
completely stop because there are always new findings and you want to
Mhm.
stay current.
mhm,
And of course, with the internet,
mhm.
crucial source of research,
Yep,
but verify everything with experts.
absolutely.
Is autism caused by vaccines? Of
Mhm.
course not. Does ADHD Does ADHD come from bad parenting? Or we all know your child could stop if they really wanted. So that's
Yep.
research.
Yep.
Now, I am a strong advocate and believe in both medications and therapy as needed. They're
Mhm.
powerful partners that help one another. Of course, there are mild cases of ADHD, anxiety, a number of other issues where therapy alone or medications alone can work. But at
Mhm.
least in Andrew and Ainsley's cases, and in many others, they've needed both from the beginning, and they will for the rest of their lives, and that's
Mhm.
fine. And
Mhm.
more than that, they've needed the medications to start working and kick in first to change the brain chemistry enough to allow therapy to start.
Yep.
Exactly. And I have said that so many times when I have done therapy with kids. I did a lot of therapy, many years ago for anxiety and many kids with autism and ADHD. And um, yeah, the parents, I think, were really hesitant to try medications. And what we often found was a little bit of medication allowed them to be able to use the coping tools that we were teaching and
Mhm.
to be able to think through those things. So,
Right.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're going to make mistakes, and there's going to be medications that are very effective, others that
Yep.
aren't. And you do have to
Absolutely.
monitor the
Mhm.
side effects and the interaction between the medications. But
Mhm.
Yep.
I can tell you, and both my kids have had shakiness, nausea at different times, lack of
Mhm.
sleep, too much appetite, too little, all that. It's trial and error, as I said, but for us, the benefits have far outweighed the risks.
Mhm.
Same with therapy. We're
Yep.
talking about, as you both know, ADHD and anxiety, largely cognitive behavioral therapy, with
Mhm.
OCD, exposure and response prevention.
Mhm.
For those on the autism spectrum, often it's social skills training, and it goes on.
Yep. And I think
Yep.
it's so, coming back to the medication point, I think it's so important to destigmatize the use of
Yep.
medications for mental health. Parents wouldn't think twice about giving their child insulin if their child has diabetes,
Yeah,
but parents will put off medication for years and years and years before finally deciding to try it and finding that it helps them very much. All often because of the stigma associated with the medication.
yeah,
So I think it's important for families to know that that's a very important and viable part of treatment for some children.
Yep.
But like you said, it might take some trial and error. The first one might not be the right fit, but it's definitely
Yep.
an avenue for families to consider. Um, it's a tricky one. So, okay, finally, and really importantly, you offer the insight of insisting, and we love this one, on integrated partnerships with everyone involved in your child's care, from healthcare providers to schools to employers as your children transition into adulthood. So, can you share how you went about doing this? Because we see this as a real challenge for families who are working with professionals who don't really venture outside of their profession much to collaborate with other professionals.
Yes, it's a major common theme. And to me, the insight of partnerships is one of the most overarching insights across your child's life. So, to this day, with both children's psychiatrists and psychologists, I make sure they regularly communicate with each other so they can adjust their approaches. If they didn't, I would change one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
With the schools, when it became apparent in both my kids' cases that the public school wouldn't work for them, even in the special education classes, I worked hard to find schools who would really partner with us. Now, what did this
Mm-hmm.
look like? At Ainsley School, monthly group meetings with her principal, all her teachers, her external psychologist, and us. So we could adjust course. Didn't always work, but she was able to stay, she was able to stay in school. Andrew's schools, notes home every night about his day, and we returned them the following morning. So we were in constant communication. You just, again, I wouldn't have kept either child in a school that wouldn't do this. And for
Mm-hmm.
parents who aren't adept at it, there are advocates and allies around, even sometimes a non-professional, a parent like me or a
Mm-hmm.
friend who's more assertive and can go with you and really be your voice.
Yep.
So
Yep.
persevere. Don't stop because you say, I don't know how to do it or I need some coaching.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And later in employment, it's the same thing. You want to find inclusive, understanding employers. I mean, to me, partnerships and teamwork mean everything.
Mhm.
Yes. It's funny because Mallory and I used to work at a private practice together, and we both did therapy. And I
Mhm.
remember Mallory having conversations with you that we often would not refer to psychiatrists if they would not communicate with us about
Mhm.
our therapy patients.
Yep.
And we'd always try and find those psychiatrists, which are few and far between, by the way,
Mhm.
that would give us calls and ask us how things were going in therapy. To me, that was like just what was essential to kids' treatment.
Yes. And also, if I had patients with IEPs or receiving extra
Yeah.
support at school, or maybe a school meeting was happened, I made that a priority. I wanted to be in those meetings, having the knowledge of the family that I did and the knowledge of the child that I did from working with them in therapy. I felt like it was an important piece of the puzzle for them to understand what we're doing outside of school and how they can maybe bridge kind of this homeschool connection to do some of that at school too. We actually got a message from a listener just this week, I think, just saying, I want my child's psychologist to be at the school meeting, but the psychologist is hesitant, doesn't know what their role can be. And I said, they can come in as an expert on ADHD too. A lot of times the schools around, sitting around the table, most of those professionals don't really know a lot about ADHD. So having someone who can advocate, who can educate, who can just be an emotional support person, because it's intimidating going into those meetings, can be really helpful for families.
Yeah, and I think so many providers, like if you're a clinical psychologist, you don't really know what goes on in schools and what
Hmm.
those processes are. And I could see how that would be intimidating. Like you think maybe those professionals of the school really understand ADHD, but the majority of them really don't.
Hmm.
And their advice and their input and the work that they're doing is so helpful to team members. So it can be amazing. But I love what you say, Jan, about advocating for your child. I was just talking to a family, and this mom was saying every time I go to a meeting and I ask for something, they're like, "No, we've maxed out services. We can't do that. We've maxed out everything." And I think that's where it can be really hard as a parent to know, have we maxed out services? Like, are there not other things that I can ask for? Like, can I not insist that I get daily communication from the teacher or weekly communication from the teacher to support my child at home? And I think sometimes you might get that pushback. And like you said, when you start to get that on a regular basis, having an advocate, an educational advocate who can go with you to those meetings and be your voice, you know your child best, and
Mhm.
you are their number one advocate. No one
Hmm.
else is going to do that job. You have to do it.
That's right. And for parents, by the way, concerned about private school costs, let's remind all of you that all those schools have scholarships if needed.
Yes. Mhm.
So
Yep.
again, persevere.
Hmm.
I love that you said that, and we have an entire online course, Shining at School with ADHD, and we talk about that because so many of our kids, just like yours that we work with, um, just can't make it in a public school setting, and they really do need the specialized support that can come from a private school that specializes in ADHD and
Hmm.
dyslexia and autism. And it is so accurate. So many people see the price tag of $30,000 a year and they're like, I can't do that. And actually, if you really research, there are so many scholarships, and families have definitely been able to get that tuition paid for through scholarships.
Hmm.
So thank you so much. This was such an amazing conversation, and so I know so helpful to our listeners. Um, will you let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can find your book that you're talking about, which I'm so excited to purchase myself? And we'll link all of this in the show notes too.
I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here. So, first of all, for listeners, if you're interested in more insights and tips and in more detail, I've just started a quarterly newsletter in January that's on my website, which is janstewartauthor.com. And I think, as Lori and Mallory know, I post every day on both Instagram, particularly, but also Facebook at Jan Stewart Author about neurodiversity. And my book, Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness, came out just earlier this month. I'm quite excited. It's widely available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, in Canada at Indigo and at Caversham and a number of other booksellers. And of course, if you read it and it resonates with you, I would greatly appreciate a review on Amazon.
Yes.
I think what I want to leave you with is a message of hope and perseverance to everyone. And really, you've heard a bit of our story today, and I want you all to know you're not alone. There's help, there's hope. Persevere and hold on tight.
Thanks for listening to Shining with ADHD by your hosts, Lori, Katie, and Mallory of the Childhood Collective. If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video and hit subscribe so you can be the first to know when a new episode airs.
If you are looking for links and resources mentioned in this episode, you can always find those in the show notes. See you next time.